Good evening and welcome to the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast and Fishhawk Live here on the Fishhawk Facebook page and over on YouTube. And if you're listening recording, really appreciate you catching up there at Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and Spotify as well. We have a special guest this evening, one of the most helpful voices in Great Lakes fishing. It's Captain Russell Gahagan. Russell, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Not a problem. Looking forward to it, and thanks for having me.
And we really appreciate you. You have a really wide background when it comes to Great Lakes fishing. You do a lot of different things. You got your hands in a lot of different things. You tell our audience, the folks who don't know about you, tell us a little bit about you and kind of what you do.
Well, that's a long-winded deal, but I'll keep it short. So, as Chris mentioned, obviously my name is Russell Gahagan. First and foremost, I grew up a block from Lake Michigan here in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. My dad's a 40-year charter captain veteran, so I grew up in the industry as a first mate, and I had a passion and love for the fishery. That grew into myself being a first mate, then, got my captain's license. I currently own a charter business called Fish Stick Fishing with my partner, Nate. I also own a store, which was known as Anglers Avenue for 10 years, and then the past couple of years is known as the Real Shot Sheboygan. And then about 2014, I opened up a business called Salmon Candy, and I've ran that ever since, which has really blown up into a big deal here in the last couple of years. It's kind of one of those things where, people talk about, sometimes things happen for a reason, and COVID hit a lot of people hard and did a lot of things for a lot of people, negative and positive. And for me, COVID was one of the reasons I really got Salmon Candy going, because it was hard to get a lot of other products. And I came to a conclusion that, we had something really special in Salmon Candy, and we just needed to, put our mind to getting that stuff produced in large volume to take care of, people all over the Great Lakes who were really looking to get that product. And we've been able to somewhat do that, and really, really do that well this year. And it's been really exciting. So, and then last but not least, I have a YouTube page called Russell's Fishing Tech, which is something I've really grown this year. It's free, and you can watch tons of videos on there that I, basically tutorials on fishing, live fishing, segments of when I'm out on the water, actually just fishing for fun, letting you come along and watch it, and you can kind of pay attention to some of the details of things that we do on a regular basis. And then there's just tons of things on there talking about, flasher fly fishing, meat rig fishing, coho fishing, brown fishing, king fishing, wire divers, every topic you could pretty much imagine we worked on all winter long, putting videos out for, and we're going to continue to. I just put one out yesterday on program building, talking about, kind of matching up colors when you figure out something's working. So I've got a long-term background in it. Plus I do a little walleye fishing. I've had a little success in the walleye tournament game and things like that. And I feel like that also can help, help me in the salmon game, because I learned some tips and tactics in walleye fishing that I can bring over. And I also kind of cross promote the color patterns and things like that, as I think walleye and salmon have a lot of generalities.
Yeah, I want to get to that program video you did later on the show. Just want to remind everybody, as we do every week here on Fishhawk Live, go ahead and drop your questions in the comments. We'll get to them as we get through the show. And as always, we will pick the question of the night. Question of the night's going to get a Fishhawk swag package. We'll send you a hat and lots of other cool free stuff that you'll get in the mail. And if you're listening from Canada, that's not a problem. We'll be happy to send it to you there as well. So go ahead and drop those questions in so Russell can get to those. Russell, we got a lot of people, especially this year with everything going on, getting into salmon fishing for the first time. Maybe they've got an inland boat. They've been fishing places like Dane County on the Madison chain or what have you. They're usually using a smaller craft. They're probably going to be running a half dozen rods out on the lake to get started. What would you recommend they pick up? If someone's out there and they're like, hey, this is the year that I want to get out on Lake Michigan, or this is the year I want to get out on Lake Ontario, what would you recommend they do to get started there?
Well, first of all, Chris, you're 100% right. I've never seen an influx in new anglers in any year that I've been around the business, which has been, like I said, basically my whole life, as I have this year. And I don't know if it's, exactly what it is, but there's definitely a lot of new anglers getting involved, which is fantastic. Couple of things, on my YouTube channel, Russell's Fishing Tech, I have 3 videos that I think are really key for that exact thing, which is a 6-rod spread, a 9-rod spread, and a 12-rod spread. So depending on how deep you're going to start into this, you can watch one of those 3 videos and it's gonna dissect those particular programs. But the number one thing that I tell people is, to come to an expert like myself, or if you have a local tackle store who's got somebody that knows what they're doing, or call us on the phone, whatever the case may be, and have somebody walk you through it. The biggest mistake I see new anglers make is they go on the internet and they buy a bunch of used stuff, and then they realize that it's used stuff because the last guy didn't want it, and they end up with a bunch of stuff that's not really what they want. And here they've spent thousands of dollars, and they end up basically re-spending that money on the new stuff that they should have got anyways. And sometimes, that used stuff might get them through the first season or whatever, but most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time they buy this stuff, they're unhappy with it, and realize that the person that had it before them is likely selling it because they didn't want it anymore. Once in a great while, somebody's getting out of the game for whatever reason, and you can buy really nice stuff used. Most of the used stuff that I see is just not the quality of stuff you want. So the nice part about salmon fishing, while it's not cheap to get involved in, some of the brands like Okuma in particular, which is one of the brands I work with the most here at the store. We do sell Shimano and Penn and all the other brands, but we work with Okuma the most because they're the most affordable. We can sell a lot of rods that are in the $30 to $45 range. We sell, their convector reel and their cold water reel, which are in the $90 to $130 range. And while that's not free or super inexpensive, it's definitely not expensive either. There's a lot of reels out there that are $200+. So my point of that is you can get into the market or get into the fishery for a fairly inexpensive amount. I have guys come almost every day and pick up a 6-rod spread to get into the fishery for $1,000 to $1,500, which in the scheme of things is affordable for a individual or family to get involved in the fishery.
Russell, when you're putting that 6-rod spread together, someone getting started, how would they go about getting those rods out? What kind of setups would you have them run?
I would start them off almost all the time with 2 dipsies and 4 planer boards. The dipsies we would rig with braided line, so they were very versatile. The braid cuts the water better than mono, so they'd be able to run those braids deep, but they'd also be able to run them shallow. And then I would set most of those individuals up with a rig that I call a pump handle. We'd rig them up with 4 of those. Those would be their planer board setups. And we generally do that because the pump handle is basically a weight, and it allows them to fish a huge section of the water column. They can fish 5 feet down with that with some real small weights. They can fish 60 or 70 feet down with that with some real big weights. And that allows them to use all 6 of their rods pretty much anywhere in the fishery, whether you're fishing in 10 foot of water in the spring for browns, or you're fishing in 300 foot of water down, 60, 70, 80 feet, in the mid or late summer. They're going to be able to run all 6 of those rods, where if we rig them up with almost anything else, likely not all 6 of those will be usable all the time. And that's the common 6-rod spread that we've been selling for a while, and it really has taken off. And you can catch a lot of fish on that particular spread.
All right, so we're talking kind of rods and reels. How about the tackle box? What kind of things should people be looking to buy if they're just getting started in Great Lakes fishing and they want to know what they should be tying on to the end of those lines?
Obviously with tackle, you're going to need an assortment of tackle. And what I do for most people that works really well is, they come in my store and I ask them, I say the best thing to do in this scenario when you're starting is just give me a budget. And I don't care if that budget is, $200 or if it's $2,000 for tackle. Give me a budget and I will pick out stuff, help you pick out stuff that's going to be successful. I would say one of the things that I've made a living on for the past 10 or 12 years is that I feel like I've never tried to sell anybody anything. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of people with reputations that, if they get something on their wall that's overstocked or that they couldn't sell, that's the item they put on sale or that's the item that they try to move. And that's never been my forte. or my MO, I guess you could say. I've continued to pump the stuff, and I've actually had customers come to my store a lot and ask me what was the hot bait, and I'll tell them, and they'll go, well, you don't have any of those, and I'll tell them exactly, I don't have any because it's the hot bait. But they'll go, well, why would you tell me that if you don't have any? Well, because I'm not going to lie to you. That is the hot bait right now. With that said, I mean, you're going to need an assortment of spoons and flashers and flies primarily. That's going to cover the bulk of your fishing. Whether you're brown trout fishing in the spring, it's generally going to be spoons. If you're salmon fishing throughout the summer, it could be spoons or flashers and flies. And then if you're fishing kings in the fall, again, it's probably going to be spoons again, maybe some plugs or things like that. But depending on the budget that they have and how much gear they want to start with, we could get them really going on spoons and flashers and flies, and then add some of the other stuff to it.
Starting to get a few questions rolling in here, and folks, again, feel free to drop your questions into the comments there, whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook. And once again, we will be choosing the question of the night for a free Fishhawk swag bag. Here's a question from YouTube. It's from Andy Sponseller, and he wants to know, how do you know where to start fishing as a weekend warrior, besides just going where you see a lot of boats?
That's a fantastic question, Andy, and it's one that I answer all the time. The number one thing that I talk about in my seminars and even on my videos online is, if you want to become a better angler, you need to do as much homework as you can at home. That's why it's called homework, as far as I'm concerned. I try to teach my kids that. And what I mean by that is, before you even hook up your boat to your truck, or before you even get in the truck to drive down to the marina to get in the boat, you should have a plan A and a plan B. And that plan A and plan B should already be decided, and that should be based on a couple of things. It should be based on fishing reports that you got off the internet or from your local tackle store. And I would definitely rely on, the internet and people that you can trust. Facebook's full of these pages now that have great reports. Almost every couple of ports, if not every port, has a tackle store that can help you with what's going on the lake currently. And I would lean on them. And then the other thing I would say is, networking is super important. So if you can become friends with a couple of people that fish regularly, or if you can even befriend some of the local charter captains, if they're willing to share some information, leaning on them without obviously going too overboard and driving them crazy, leaning on them for information is important. The reality of it is, there isn't like a book here. I mean, Dan Keating does a great job writing some books, but there is no book on where the salmon should live. A lot of it is, find them on a specific day, and then as the weather happens, the next day, it moves the fish. Currents might move the fish, wind might move the fish, water temperature might move the fish, and some of those things you can figure out on your own, just based on past experiences. But a lot of them, you just gotta, it's trial and error, and the best way to trial and error is a bunch of boats go like this, and somebody finds some fish. So, doing your homework at home is really important. Join some of them groups, network with some friends, meet some of the charter captains, and rely on your local tackle store for a place to start.
All right, great stuff. Here's one from Ryan Klein. And Ryan wants to know, can you talk about what your opinion is as the number one tool to have in your fishing arsenal, whether that be tackle, electronics, networking, etc.?
Well, number one, I would have to say networking is probably number one. As I just mentioned, what I know is, if you're not on the fish, you're not going to catch the fish. And if you're on the fish and they're biting really good, you will catch them on a whole bunch of different things. There's no doubt about it. With that said, I feel like there's levels of anglers, and I talk about this a lot in my salmon schools and seminars and stuff. Going from level 0 to 5 is pretty easy. Going from level 5 to 8 is still fairly easy. But gets a little bit harder, and going from level 8 to 10 gets really hard. And those levels, I would answer that question that Ryan has differently based on the level you're on. If you're in 0 to 5, networking is going to be key. Like I just mentioned on the question before, having a starting spot, knowing somebody that can help guide you to the area, talking to the local tackle store, just being on the fish and not coming in with a 0 or 1 in the cooler, coming in with 4, 5, 6. You're 4, 5, 6 better of a fisherman than you were the last time you went. So that's fairly easy to fix. That 5 to 8, I would say, is probably that's where equipment comes in. Fishhawk would be a number one piece of electronics. I've been saying that for 10 years now. Other than a GPS, to get you in and out safely. The fish hawk's the most important thing you should have on your boat. I don't even pay attention to my fish finder. I mark my fish with my rods. You can mark them all day. If they're not biting, it doesn't matter. And I've caught my limit, never marking a fish. So a fish hawk's super important for them people trying to go from 5 to 8, in my opinion, and trying to learn the water and understand how to make moves and why do you make a move based on water temperature, currents, things like that. And then that 8 to 10, in my opinion, that's where tackle really comes in. Like, we can get people to jump from 0 to 5 with some tackle help as well. But if they're not on fish, it doesn't help. Once you get that 0 to 8 figured out, you've got some, you got some networking ability down. You've got a fish hawk. You're able to read the water a little bit. Now actually physically catching those fish when a lot of other people can't, that's where the tackle really comes into play. So I know I kind of answered that in a 3-way stage, Ryan, but I hope that helps a little bit. And I know who you are and I know what level you're at. So I think there's an easy answer for you yourself.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Here's one from Captain Mark at King's Landing Sport Fishing. He was on the show 3 or 4 weeks ago. He says, many of us missed the Salmon Showdown 333 show. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience you had when you participated in the show?
Yeah, so the Salmon Showdown, I miss it as well. I wish they'd do it again. It was besides having children, it was probably the most fun period of my life, that 4 or 5 years that I really participated on that. I'm ultra competitive. My competitive idol or sports idol is Kobe Bryant, who I also think was ultra competitive. And I try to feel like I do some of the things that I felt like he did really well, and work ethic and work hard and things like that. And I learned a ton. A lot of the things that I talk about and the knowledge I gained, I learned as a first mate over the years and then a captain, but a lot of the really detailed techniques and things that make me the angler I am today, I definitely learned during that Salmon Showdown time, because I just literally wanted to be the best. And that was the 4 or 5 year period where I worked the hardest at it. And, I'll be the first to admit, and I tell lots of people this, I'm not as good a fisherman as I was 5 years ago. In a lot of ways. In some ways, I'm better because I'm more knowledgeable today than I was then. Every year goes by, I obviously gain more knowledge, and if you don't, then you're doing something wrong. But as far as fishing skill goes, I feel like part of that too is you need to be out there and doing that. And unfortunately for me, being in the fishing business, I was told a long time ago by many people, I think Trevor from Fish Hawk was one of them, that one way not to go fishing a bunch is get in the fishing business. And owning a tackle store, having young children, those are a couple of guaranteed ways not to get out of the lake a lot. So, that was a 4 or 5 year period where, I was out on the lake a lot, spent a lot of time on the water, and it was a ton of fun.
Awesome. There's one from John Barber on Facebook. He says he's looking to upgrade from an 8-pound rigger ball to a 10-pound ball. Do you see any value in the shark weights? They're pretty expensive compared to a cannonball or a pancake.
John, if you're trying to keep your weight down because of the style of boat you have or style of downrigger you have, I think that the shark weight is a great idea for you. You mentioned that you're at an 8-pound ball, which is really small in my opinion. The average size downrigger ball I would say on the Great Lakes right now is probably 15 pounds. That's probably the average. A lot of guys have 12s. A lot of guys have 17 or 20s. If you're looking to keep that weight down for some specific reason, and you might have a great reason to do that, then that 10-pound shark might be a great option for you. Otherwise, I think a 12, 14, or 15-pound round ball is what we sell the most of, and it's probably just mostly about price. You can buy 2 or 3 of them for the price of a shark, but I think the shark's a great option if you're looking for something that pulls through the water easier, and you can get away with a little bit lighter ball and not so much blowback.
All right. So you recently produced a video on building a program.
Yep.
You really detailed how you pair up colors and presentations when you're fishing. Can you go through some of that with our viewers, just how you kind of do that and put together those programs?
Yeah. So one of the things, and I learned this really more, I mentioned earlier, I'm a walleye tournament guy as well, and I don't do a ton of that anymore either. But when I was a kid, about 14 years old, my dad and I started fishing some of the bigger walleye tournaments together as a team. We did that for 4 years. Actually, no, I take that back. We did that for 6 years until I found out I was going to have my first child when I was 22. And one of the things that I learned the most about during that time was putting together a program. My dad and I, being trollers, we trolled a lot. And obviously we'd travel to all these different lakes in the Midwest primarily to fish walleyes. And one of the things we'd find out is that each particular lake and each time of year at each bite, there'd be one or two color patterns that would really work. Well, my dad's always been superstitious, so he wasn't a big fan of running like 6 of the same exact color crankbaits. He didn't let me do that at all, actually. He felt like if you ran more than one of the same exact color, they didn't work as well. I don't know if that's true or not, to be honest with you, but that's what he taught me, and he's the best fisherman I've ever met, in my opinion. So I believed what he said. So what I did a lot of times was I spent a lot of time trying to find the closest thing to it that would also work. And what I think happens when you do that, I'll give you some examples. Like on my video I mentioned, right now they're really biting really good on chrome and blue flashers. So, a chrome or silver flasher with a lot of blue tape on it, different patterns. And that's common. I've been talking about that for years. In May and June, I find here in the Wisconsin side of Lake Michigan, and even in Michigan when I've been there in this time of year, the early cold water, silver and blue is just dynamite on Lake Michigan. So what I've done is, I'll start with 1 or 2 silver and blues in the morning, expecting those to be good. Give a couple examples if people know the Salmon Candy brand, like a blue stud UV flasher and maybe a Megatron flasher. And then if those 2 go, then I'll start just adding more chrome and blue patterns. So I'll add Blue Jeans UV, which is another chrome and blue. I'll add SGH, which is another chrome and blue. And I'll just continue to add more and more of those chrome and blue patterns till sooner or later, I've got them on every rod if they're working that well, or, sooner or later something else I find in my spread starts to work better, and then I'll back that off and add some more of something else. And then I find the same thing happens kind of later in the year. All of a sudden maybe green goes. So maybe we've got a bunch of green flashers out, or we got chrome and green flashers, and that happens a lot. There's usually a transition somewhere in that May, June time frame where all of a sudden the chrome and blue still works, but it's not as good. I'll put out a couple chrome and green flashers like a Green Jeans or a chrome stud, and those go, and then all of a sudden I start putting more of those out. And I think that's where I mentioned before, like that getting from a level 8 to a level 10 angler, that's some stuff in there. That's some advanced stuff, I would say, that once a guy really gets a feel for that, and that's what it is, it's a feel for it. Once a guy gets a feel for it and he understands kind of how to make that happen, you can multiply your catches pretty quickly, especially on some of the bigger fish and the fish that are a little more picky about exactly what they want. You can start to really multiply your catches fast and add to that cooler really fast when you can make more rods work. And I talk about that all the time. That's really what it's about. I don't care if you go out there with 6 rods, 9 rods, or 12 rods, or 20 rods for that matter. If you've only got 2 or 3 working with the right lures on them in the right area of the water column at the right speed, right action, well, then you're only trolling with 2 or 3 lures or 2 or 3 rods. So you're really not doing yourself any justice. You actually could be hurting yourself if you're putting a pile of rods out and you keep getting bites on the same 2 or 3. All these other rods are really just in the way. And they end up being tangle hazards and options to lose fish. So if you want to get really good at this game and catch a lot of fish out on the Great Lakes, the easiest way to do that is to just, figure out how to multiply your setups into the fact to where you can get as many rods working as possible at the same time. And that's going to give your best chances for multiple bites at the same time, and also just your best chances for a consistent day of fishing.
All right, here's a really easy one for you, Russell. Kyle Nisler asks, he wants to know if the Real Shot has just one location. We know you're in Sheboygan. How about the other location?
No, there's 2 locations. There's one in Appleton, Wisconsin. That's the home-based store that's been around for a while. And then, like I said, I have the store here in Sheboygan. It's kind of a unique relationship. So there's a group that owns that store and a group that owns this store, but we do a lot of things together, marketing wise, inventory wise, things like that. So works out really well that way. And it's been a joint venture here for a few years now.
All right, here's one from Ryan Sharp, and we got a couple of questions here coming in here
Good.
about copper and lead core. Ryan wants to know, he says he started running copper and lead core together on the same rod. Is this something you've tried, and would you recommend it?
That's a great question. I've never tried it, and I'm not sure why somebody would do it. If they had a theory or they felt there was a reason why it would work better than something else, I don't know why you wouldn't, but it isn't something that I've ever done or really heard of anybody doing. One thing that I'm not a giant fan of is knots. And what I mean by that is any setup I have, I try to limit the amount of knots involved. Whenever you have knots, you're going to have failures. It's just reality. Knots get beat up going through the line guides and on the reel and through the rod guides, and they take a beating, and that's usually one of the weak points of any setup. So, I would never try to add more knots necessarily. But again, I mean, if something's working, I'm always willing to try it. And if somebody thinks that there's like an action difference on that or something, might be the next big thing, but it's never been something I've done.
All right, here's another one. This is from Tim Schlappy, and he wants to know, would you choose copper or lead core if you could only run one?
I guess if I could only run one, I'd run copper because you have the option to get deeper. I personally, I'm a big pump handle fan, and then I generally own some deep copper to cover some of the deep stuff that I can't cover with a pump handle. But there's lots of boats that I set up almost every day with, they use lead core basically from 5 colors or higher, some of them like 10 colors or higher. And then once they get to that 10 color mark, they'll start to go into the 200, 250, 300, 350, the deeper copper stuff. So even though they're both weighted lines, which I have a video on that, talking about that and going over that, they're really very different. They act different in the water, and they really generally cover a different section. Unless you're going to own a bunch of light coppers, then it can be the same as lead core. And I guess that's why I'd go with copper then, just because it's got more, gives you more option, more flexibility there. And that's what I talk about a lot with especially newer anglers is you kind of got to decide. I mean, how many rods and reels do you want to own? If you want to own 30 rods and reels, you can have a whole bunch of different setups, and I think that it can be an advantage. But if you're going to only own 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 rods and reels, the real key to that is you got to make those flexible. So in other words, if they only cover one section of the water column, that rod becomes, in my opinion, a lot less useful because it's stuck at that one section. And if they're not biting right there, you're not going to have any success with it. And that's what goes back to where I said, trying to get as many rods as possible in your spread producing. And that's not easy to do.
All right. Here's one from Ron Turchinsky. And Ron would like to know, what electric downriggers would you advise getting?
It's a great question. As I mentioned a lot, I think downriggers are one of the last things somebody should purchase in their setup just because of the, the productability of them are not as good as they once were. Matter of fact, I jokingly call them probe holders now, and the probe being a fishhawk probe because that's way more important than the downrigger, but we need it a lot of times to hold the probe. So with that said, I guess if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick a Canon Optimum, the new one, because it works with the fishhawk and displays the fishhawk screen. But if that's a little rich for your blood or just a little more than a guy wants to spend or is in the budget, then the Canon Mag 10 is hard to beat for sure. But you can get a lot done with a manual rigger too. You don't have to have electric. So for a guy that doesn't want to maybe spend the money on that, you can get away with a hand crank. The boat I fish on all the time on YouTube is a 2100 Skeeter that my buddy Matt owns, that we do all our videos on, and he's got hand crank downriggers, and we've caught a lot of fish on those, and it's don't have any problems with them. You're not drawing any power, and they're not really a big deal to put up and down.
Awesome. Here's one from Luke Hansen on Facebook. He says he doesn't do very well with flashers and flies. What can I do to improve my success with these setups? There's lots of answers for this, I'm sure. So we don't know what he does with his, but what are kind of some of your best flasher and fly tips?
Well, number one, the Salmon Candy lineup is basically designed to help that angler. So what's neat about the Salmon Candy fly system is it's got what I call an interchangeable fly system. Basically, the head is big enough that you can slide the fly on and off the leader, meaning it's the only fly on the market that it doesn't have to stay on that particular leader. Why is that important? Well, I'm not going to get into all the details of that right now. You should watch that video on YouTube because it's a 20-minute conversation. But basically, I believe the line is actually more important than the fly when it comes to scent and things like that. But I do believe that the fly color makes a huge difference from day to day. So what I want to do is I want to keep those leaders healthy as long as I can and keep them fishing as long as I can with the ability to color match again, like I talked about earlier when we were talking about patterns that are producing. One of the things that I do is while I'm program building with my flashers, I'll put a bunch of the same color flies out when they're working. In other words, I'll mention one of the names, Salmon Candy's Mercy UV fly, which is our #1 seller. Not the only one in the group that works, just it's our number one seller. If that's what's working today, I might have 6 or 8 of those out at a time behind 6 or 8 different flashers. And you have the ability to easily do that by just sliding your other flies off the line and putting the Mercies on the line. You're quickly fishing with 6 or 8 of those Mercies. And that's a great way to manufacture more bites by adding more of the right stuff. So a couple things that you can do, Luke, that I think help. You can, really pay attention to the color patterns and things that I'm talking about on a couple of day basis. Almost every couple of days I'm putting out a fishing report or a video or something. Get on the hot program. Like right now, all up and down the Wisconsin lakeshore, the Blue Stud UV salmon candy flashers hot, the Megatron salmon candy flashers hot, the Green Gene salmon candy flashers hot, SGH is hot. You could buy those, and there's more. White Megatron, Chrome Stud, Mountain Dew Stud. You could buy those 5 or 6 or 7 I just mentioned and have tons of success right now out on Lake Michigan, because that's what's working right now. And I'm going to tell you that in my videos, my posts, if you call the store, whatever, and then obviously match those up with the right flies and have the flexibility to switch flies on the go if you need to.
Well, that's something we wanted to talk about. You and I were talking before the show started tonight. You're saying right now that Lake Michigan is the best that you've probably ever seen it. It goes back to rival the 2012 season. What's going on there on Lake Michigan right now?
Well, yeah, like I mentioned, whenever I compare things, I take 2012 out of play. So if you're watching this right now and you were around in 2012, you'll know that that was an anomaly year. There were limits of kings being caught up and down the entire lake already in the month of May, which is just not normal. Nobody knows what happened that year and why it was like that. But we got something weird going on this year that's a lot of fun. The fishing is probably, again, taking 2012 out of play because I don't think it's a norm. It is probably the best early season salmon fishing I've seen on the Wisconsin side in 25 years. From all the way down to the state line, all the way up to Two Rivers right now, there's basically limits of fish being caught regularly by a lot of anglers. And I'm talking novices to experts, not just great anglers, not just good anglers, but novice anglers are catching limits. I was in Port Washington over the weekend. The parking lot was so packed. They were parked 4 blocks down. And I mean, literally 75% of the boats or more coming off the lake had their limit. The cohos are thick. They're being caught by everybody. There's some kings around, which is good and very early. Rainbows are biting, which is very early for rainbow trout this year. And the lake's full of lake trout, so you can catch a bunch of them, a lot when you want to. And just everything is biting. Everything looks healthy. The bait fish is still on the shoreline, so I think that's part of it. It's just making its way back out to the lake. So there's not as much to eat in the lake as there is normally because that bait fish population's spawning by the shoreline. So it's just going back out there. So the fish are coming out of the winter mode. They're hungry and they want to bite, and there's not a lot around except for your lures. So it's going to be a really special year. I predicted this about a month ago to a bunch of people who could verify that, customers in the store and friends of mine. I thought it was going to be one of the better years of all time, and I'm going to stick by that, at least for the Wisconsin side, I will say. I think it's going to be an epic season, and if you've got a boat, you got some gear, and you want to get out there, let's do it.
All right, here's one from Thomas Hewer. What's your target temp for kings? Do you put your baits above, in, or below that temp?
So I talk about this a lot. The target temp is set up differently every year. I don't feel like there's a temperature map for that. You might catch kings in 56-degree water. You might catch them right now the water down 40 or 50 or 60 is 44, 43, 42 degrees, and we're catching kings in that. In July, we'll catch them in 60-degree water. So the kings are where they are. What I generally like to do is once I find them for the season and they kind of start to school up, which here in Sheboygan is usually in late May, early June, I'll sort of figure out what water temperature they're in, and then I'll follow that around from there. So I might be catching them 40 down and 80 foot. And we might get a certain wind that pushes that water to 60 down and 100 foot. And then that water might end up being 30 down and 50 foot. And then way out deep and way deep by the end of the year. So you kind of just try to follow that around, and that's why that fish hawk comes into play so much, is you need some sort of device that's going to tell you what the temperature is. And then lastly, what's really important is just remember that starting around early August, all bets are off. Once those adult salmon start to turn colors and start to get ready for the spawn, temperature means nothing to them anymore. Feeding basically means nothing to them anymore. They're going to start to head towards the harbor. They're going to get in some water that's not normal for them, and they're going to start getting super aggressive and biting some super aggressive stuff like J-plugs and bright colored lures and things like that, that they normally aren't feeding on or biting, but they're doing that out of aggression more than hunger.
All right. Here's a good one I like from YouTube from Ellie Teller. She said, if you and someone else go fishing once every weekend, but sometimes you have a third person come along, how important is it to go from a 6-rod spread to 9?
Again, I think it's as important as you make it. And what I mean by that is if you can't get 9 rods in the strike zone, then probably adding more rods isn't going to help you at all. But if you're set up appropriately, whether you have 6, 9, or 12 rods, if you've set them up yourself, or if your local tackle store or myself or whoever sets you up appropriately, you should be able to get 9 rods into the strike zone. And if you can do that, you should catch 33% more fish. And that's the key. I mean, I'm going to catch X amount with 3 rods. I'm going to catch, twice as many with 6 rods, another third as many with 9 rods, and another third as many with 12 rods. And, a lot of people say, well, why do charter guys catch so many fish? It's really just mathematics. I mean, they put 12, 15, 20 rods out there, and they're experienced and they know what they're doing, and they do a really good job of getting most to all of those rods in the strike zone with lures on them that the fish want. And when they do that, they can manufacture more bites, which then equals more fish than what an average person can do with a lot less rods.
All right, Arlo Tonks, he's a guy that seems to be watching every week, and he usually gets involved, and he's involved tonight. He says, Russ, from watching your videos and talking with you in the past, I know you're a believer in a little slower trolling speed than most. What advantage do you feel this gives?
2 things. I believe that big fish are a lot like other animals and even human beings. And what I mean by that is if you go deer hunting and you go to shoot a big buck, generally that big buck isn't the one that's, rushing out to the open field. He's also not the one that's running around through everywhere. He's walking very slowly, very cautiously, taking his time, checking everything out. And quite frankly, I feel the same way about, other types of animals and things like that. And I think salmon are the same. That 2 to 10 pound king races to that pot of bait fish and grabs it as fast as it can, as that 15 to 25 pound king takes his time, sort of checks the school out, makes sure he picks out the bait that he wants, or the forage that he wants, or the 1 out of the group or the 6 out of the group that he's going to try to attack for the easy meal. So I think that the slow speed has been something that's been my forte, especially come tournament fishing and catch bigger fish for a long time. And then the other thing I think it does is it helps manufacture more bites. What I mean by that is by going slower, you naturally stay over the top of the fish longer. I don't care if the pot of fish is a 1/4 mile long, a 1/10 of a mile long, or a mile long, or 5 miles long. If you're trolling over the top of them at 2.5 miles an hour, and I'm trolling over the top of them at 2 miles an hour, I'm going to spend more time on the fish. You're going to spend more time outside the fish, turning around, things like that, because you're ripping through them. So over the course of time, even though that doesn't sound like a big deal, over 5 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours, I feel like I'm just going to be over the top of the fish longer than you are, and I'm going to get more chances at them.
All right, that's a great answer. Here's one from Jamie Ryan. He says, what line are you running with your pump handles?
50-pound braid, and then a 17-foot, 25-pound mono leader. And that 17-foot's sort of an odd number, but it's the distance that I feel like is right, that it's far enough back that you can easily take the pump handle ball off of the line so it's not swinging in whoever's face that's going to grab it, because the fish is far enough back yet that he's not going crazy right behind the boat, not all spooked by the boat. But it's close enough that the term pump handle comes from that weight, that round ball that I hook on there. Hold my hand like this. The round ball that I hook on there, and it kind of bounces up and down in the waves like this when you get wave action. Well, of course, that naturally lifts and pulls that flasher up and down like this in the water. And it gives it a pumping kind of rhythmic motion that I think gives a different action than lead core and copper. So you want it close enough to the weight that you get that, but not too close that becomes dangerous. And actually in other parts of Lake Michigan and Wisconsin, they call those rods weapon rods. And it's because that weight can be like a weapon to somebody trying to take it off the line. So that's why I prefer setting it up with that method.
Here's a follow-up question from Jamie. He wants to know, what's the maximum depth you can reach fishing with the pump handles?
It depends on how many you want to run. I can get 100 down with them if I only want to run a couple. But if you want to do the spread that I like to run, which is 6 planer boards and 6 pumps, that gives you the best chance to, again, manufacture more bites, doubles, triples, quadruples, things like that. Then I feel like 60 to 70 downs about your max, because I have sort of a guideline that I want to stick in, which is I run all my pumps 75 to 150 feet out. So the shortest lead I put on them is 75 to keep it kind of stealthy, get it away from the board. And the longest lead I like to run is 150. So if that 75 to 150 doesn't get me in the area I want to be in, I just change weights and go lighter if I want to go higher, or heavier if I want to go deeper. And that gets me where I want to be.
All right. Here's one from Steve V, and this gets back when we were talking colors. He says, when running spoons and flies, you match colors on both sides of the boat or try one pattern per side?
No, so I'll mix the entire boat. I don't ever try like side to side. First of all, when I go fishing most of the time, whether it's on a charter, a tournament, fun fishing, it's sort of the normal thing here. I don't know if it's normal anywhere else, but usually when I go fishing, I get one side of the boat and then the person I'm fishing with gets the other. Or if I'm like going on a charter and I'm running the boat with my partner Nate gets one side of the boat, I get the other. So we usually pick our own gear out. So I'll put a selection of stuff out. I might say I'm going to run, 4 flashers on my side. I might put 2 chrome and blues and 2 chrome and greens out to start, and I might put 2 green flies, one blue fly and 1 glow fly out or something to start, see what the fish want. That's something I talk about a lot that I think is one of the biggest tips I can give people that my dad taught me when I was a young kid, which is I said something to him one time. I said, Dad, I think I was on a charter with him, and I said, man, this lake changes fast. I mean, it changes every week. I mean, sometimes it even changes every couple days. And he's like, no, son, he's like, it actually changes every trip. And that sunk in with me, and he was 100% right. You can't even really take what happened in the morning and expect the same results and same things to happen in the afternoon. Things change literally every time you go out fishing. Sometimes more than others. Sometimes it changes a lot. Sometimes it just changes a little. But my point of that is I almost never take too much into consideration from before. I use it as a starting point, and that's what I talked about earlier, doing your homework and having a starting place to fish and a starting lineup of tackle. But the guys that are really good have to be on their toes and have to have an understanding of what to do to switch some things up, or like I said, build your program throughout the morning. That's how you're going to catch a bunch more fish, because what they bit on today, they might not bite on all 6 or 8 of those lures tomorrow. They might only bite on 4, and you got to try to switch up the other 4 that aren't working to something else to get those working.
All right, this is from Kennedy on YouTube. Kennedy would like to know, what is your advice to a young avid fisherman who's looking to get into starting a big lake year-round charter service on Lake Michigan?
Well, first of all, I would say if you want to have a year-round charter service, you need to buy a 21-foot boat or less, and probably aluminum boat, because if you're going to go out in the cold weather, bust ice, do things like that, you're going to definitely need that type of boat. The other thing I would say is that you need to be able to be willing to move around, and that's what a trailerable boat will give you, which is great. What I mean by that is, you got to be willing to hear. So if you're from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, if I was going to start a charter service and wanted to be mobile, it was what I was going to do, different than what I have now, where I have a 33-foot boat at the dock. Say I wanted to be mobile and I wanted to have a year-round business, I might start down at the state line, or even into Illinois in early parts of the season where the lake's a little bit warmer, the fish are biting, and I'd work my way all the way up, and I might be chartering up in Sturgeon Bay in July and August, because that's where the best fishing is. So you need to be mobile and be willing to move around, have your clientele be willing to move around. Even if they book in the off season and you tell them you think you're going to be in Sheboygan or Manitowoc in July, you got to be willing to call them the week before and say, hey, best bite right now is out of Door County. Can we meet up there? You get a room there, and we'll go out there because the fishing's just better there. And that's the way I think the lake's starting to go to. There's a lot less boats at the dock nowadays, a lot less of the 33-footers. parked at the dock. There's a lot more trailerable boats and individuals getting into it with an 18 to 21 foot trailerable boat. And that's awesome because it gives them flexibility. And that's what I think will help them catch more fish. And I mentioned at the top of this broadcast, if you're not on fish, you're not going to catch fish. And that's the number one thing. So the easiest way to get on fish is to drive where the fish are. But it's a lot easier to drive there in your trucks than it is in a car. Excuse me. It's a lot easier to drive in your trucks than it is in the boat. So if the fish are biting 70 miles from your home city, it's easier to drive 70 miles in the trucks than it is in the boat. So having that flexibility and having a boat on the trailer that you can move around with really will help you.
Russell, one of the things that you're really well known for, obviously, is your Salmon Candy brand. It's custom tackle. Tell us a little bit about Salmon Candy and kind of how you got into doing what you do there.
Yeah, so actually the fly was my dad's idea. Back in 2014, he said to me, I'm getting tired of storing all these flies. We had hundreds and hundreds of flies, and we all did. And because they were tied on a leader and they were kind of set that way, you had to find a way to store them. And being a charter captain and I kind of understanding the building a program thing, like I mentioned, we had 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 of all these flies because we'd run 6 or 8 at a time if that's what was working. And, you just get tired of storing hundreds of flies. So he came up with this idea that, we ended up manufacturing this interchangeable fly system. And it works really, really great. And that was kind of something that I've done since 2014, kind of just basically selling it primarily in my store here. And it was always something that we just never had enough inventory of. People wanted it, and we had very little. And then, like I said, a couple of years back, we really got it going as far as the flies go. And then last year, we introduced the flashers. And then this year, we kind of took it to a whole new level. We've got we all got the flies, we got the flashers, we brought a spoons out, and kind of came out with a new spoon that's sort of different than what everybody else is doing. And that's really been phenomenal. And it's had crazy good results so far. We came out with meat rigs. We're going to have sort of a fun release here coming up on fish blades, fish shaped flashers. We've got, lake trout rigs. We hit the market hard with cowbells this year for lake trout, and that's been helping anglers all over the Great Lakes catch a bunch of fish this spring. So it's just blowing up. I mean, I always had a vision that it was going to be really big, Chris, but I got to be honest. I mean, I didn't think it was going to turn into what it is now. And I'm excited about it. I've got 4, 5, 6 people working on a daily basis. Never would have imagined that. Right here in the store, you can kind of see I'm actually in I'm in our stock room right now. You can see right here behind me is where we keep all the spoons. All the boxes are labeled and stuff like that with what spoon it is for our back stock. On this side over here is where all the flasher back stock is, which is pretty empty right now because sales have been really good. There's flies and all that around. And then in the other room, you might be able to hear a noise from here and there. There's actually 2 guys working over there right now who are both high school kids who go to school during the day, and then they come in and they work. And I've got 4 or 5 individuals that are working on a daily basis making this stuff. And it's really turned into a full-time gig. We spent all winter, 5, 6, 7 people every day working really hard on this. And we've built a lot of inventory, and we've sold a lot of inventory already. And we're going to continue to sell a bunch of inventory. And it really just all kind of relates back to myself is really what it does. My Russell's Fishing Tech, myself in the store here, and just the fact that we point people in the right direction. I put a little live video up this weekend, for example, of a 28-pound king we caught out of Port Washington. And, that king bit a fly behind a flasher. And of course, we had a giant run on those flies and flashers. But what was neat about that was it's not like it's just a gimmick to sell some stuff. I'd be lying if I said I had less than 100 text messages or Facebook messages in the past 48 to 72 hours with people thanking me that went out the next day or the day after and boated a bunch of fish on that flasher and that fly, or flashers and flies like that I recommended in my program building video. So, it's really fun for me when the other people get to enjoy the fishery and the excitement and have the success that I want them to have. And that's really what Salmon Candy is all about. Naturally, we want to sell gear, but there's more to it than that. We're selling people the gear they need to catch more fish, and it's working, and that's why we're having such success. It's not just some product we're putting out there that, some of it may work, some may not. I mean, we're only putting out stuff that's working.
One of the kind of the magical things about what you're doing is you've got so many variations on really similar patterns. And I watched that video that you were talking about on building a program, and a lot of these flies or the flashers that you're showing, there's not a lot of difference in them. So the slight variations essentially is what we're talking about. Do you really see that big a difference between some of those real slight variations on things?
100%. It's crazy. We talk about this a lot. We joke about this a lot, whether the tackle sometimes is more for the fisherman or the fish. But in reality, if you've got experience out there and you ask almost any charter captain, hardcore tournament angler, any of them, they're all going to tell you the same thing, that it matters. The brand matters, the color matters, the size matters. All of that makes a difference. I'll give you an example for a walleye guy out there. A fire tiger flicker shad's not going to work the same as a fire tiger shad wrap. They're basically identical looking baits. From 10 feet away, you could probably hardly tell the difference unless you were a walleye tackle expert. To the average eye, they'd never know the difference, but it matters. And the same thing goes for other brands of flashers versus ours versus, color patterns. Give you another example, like you said before, that, there's slight variations. The Megatron doesn't look a lot different than the SGH, which doesn't look a lot different from the Blue Stud, but they are very different. And when you put them in the water and they start rolling over, they've all got quite a bit different reflections. It's interesting is they're similar enough that they generally work when, they each work when that particular style of color is working, that chrome and blue is working. Each of them work, but absolutely no doubt one of them will stand out on a daily basis. Blue Stud might take 4 or 5 hits, while SGH takes 2 or 3, while Megatron takes 1 or 2. And then, 3 days later, Megatron may take 4 or 5 hits when the other ones take 1 hit, 2 hits, 3 hits. So for whatever particular reason, those subtle differences make all the difference in the world, and a fish will pick that out from a day-to-day basis.
Well, Russell, we really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. It was almost a good hour of taking questions, and you're a huge source of information for people. Your YouTube channel, I use it a lot to educate myself, and I think people go to Russell's Fishing Tech on YouTube if you want to learn about fishing. If you're one of those people that's getting started in this game and you want to know how to get started, it's a great place to go. It's a great resource. Russell does. I mean, it's essentially what you're doing there is you're putting in seminars, short seminars, and all kinds of different things. So you can definitely go to Russell's Fishing Tech to find out more about what Russell's got going on. If people want to get a hold of you other ways, Russell, what's the best way for them to kind of keep tabs on you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I got Russell's Fishing Tech on YouTube. I've got Russell's Fishing Tech on Facebook. I obviously have the store, The Real Shot Sheboygan, which you can call us anytime at 920-395-2079. If you're looking to order some product or you're looking to get some product, we also got our Salmon Candy website, www.salmoncandyfishing.com. There's also the Real Shot website, which is www.therealshot.com. So there's a whole bunch of places that you can find stuff that I have an influence on. But the biggest thing right now is, I kind of mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to make this comment before we finish up here. I mentioned earlier that, that 4 or 5 year period of time in my life where I was doing the tournaments was some of the most fun and some that I'll never forget. I'm kind of entering, Chris, into a time period now where I'm really enjoying it too. It's to me, it's kind of like in some ways when a pro sports athlete plays pro sports and then after he becomes a coach. And that's kind of where I am at this point in my life. Again, I love tournament fishing. I do a couple of tournaments every year. I really enjoy it. I'm super competitive yet, but really the most enjoyment I get out of the fishery now, truthfully, is when I get that text or phone call or email, and I get a lot of them, and I'm really appreciative of every single one. I got 3 or 4 today, and it's just that quick note of, hey, Russell, wanted to say thanks. I stopped in the store over the weekend, or I watched this video and I bought these 3 things and I went to this depth, like you said, and I caught the fish of a lifetime, or I boated my first limit, or I'm just enjoying continued success, unlike I've ever had on the Great Lakes. And I've sort of got to that point in my life now where I get more enjoyment actually out of everybody else doing good and having fun than I do myself. I've had my time of enjoyment there, and I still love going out and catching a bunch of fish. Now that'll never get old to me, but I see a little more fun in everybody else having success. So that's where we're at now. We're going to continue to try to educate people and try to sell them the right stuff. And as I said before, I'm not trying to just sell anybody anything or sell them something they don't need. What I really want to do is have them spend their money wisely by buying the stuff that they really need that's going to help them catch more fish.
Awesome, Russell. Once again, really appreciate you coming on the show tonight. The question of the evening is going to go to Luke Hansen. Luke, go ahead and drop us a private message on Facebook with your address, and we'll get your package out to you. But Russell, thanks so much for everything you did with us tonight and everything you've done in the past with us, and hope for continued success for you, especially with this year going on and a lot of good stuff on the horizon.
Yeah, we really appreciate myself and everybody here at the store, and Salmon Candy appreciates you giving us the time to come on and having something so great like this live to be able to do this. And lastly, thank you to all the customers out there and the people that signed on. You know, that's what it's all about. If nobody's interested in the stuff, it really doesn't matter. So we're thankful to have everybody home healthy and ready for a great season of fishing.
Thanks so much for joining us this evening, guys. Next week, we're going to be talking Lake Huron. So we'll see you on Fish Hawk Live. It'll be next Thursday night, and we'll be talking Lake Huron. Take care, everybody.